She went to the grocery store. That is it. That is the whole plan for the day. Thanksgiving morning, a young mother straps her 1-year-old daughter into a shopping cart at the Safeway in Woodland Park, Colorado, and walks the aisles picking out ingredients for dinner. The security cameras catch everything. She is smiling. She looks relaxed. She looks like someone who has nowhere more important to be. That footage, recorded at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon on November 22nd, 2018, is the last time anyone outside her home would ever see Kelsey Berreth alive. And here is the part that I cannot stop thinking about. Her phone kept sending messages for 3 more days after that. From 700 miles away. Stick with me on this one. Because the closer you look at the details of this case, the more things stop making sense. And that is usually where the real story is hiding. Before we get into what happened, I want you to understand who Kelsey was. Not just as a name in a headline, but as a person. Because I think it matters. I think it changes how you see everything that follows. Kelsey Berreth was 29 years old, born February 25, 1989 in Washington State. She grew up on a farm with her mother Cheryl, her father Daryl, and her brother Clinton. And from the time she was young, she had one thing she wanted more than almost anything else. She wanted to fly. Not as a passenger, as the one in command. She studied aviation. She earned every license and certification she needed. And by 2017, she had a job as a flight instructor at DOS Aviation in Pueblo, Colorado. Her coworkers described her the same way almost every time. Punctual, hardworking, bright. The kind of person who keeps photos of her daughter and Bible verses on her desk, and somehow makes that feel completely natural. At her desk at DOS Aviation, those two things sat side by side every single day. Her mother Cheryl once said that Kelsey needed 3 things to feel like herself: a good night of sleep, time with God, and a run. And apparently she was also very particular about her coffee. Caramel macchiatos most of the year, pumpkin spice lattes when the season allowed it. Small rituals. Specific preferences. A woman who knew exactly what she liked and built a life around them, things that mattered to her. She also had a daughter named Kaylee, born November 11th, 2017. And by every account, becoming a mother was something Kelsey had wanted deeply. She worked full-time as a flight instructor and raised Kaylee essentially on her own. Not because she chose to be alone, but because of the man in her life. His name was Patrick Frazee. He was a rancher from Florissant, Colorado, and he and Kelsey had met online in 2017. Kaylee was their daughter, and yet Patrick never lived with Kelsey. He stayed at the family ranch, and when asked why, the answer was always the same. The business needed him there. He could not leave. Kelsey accepted that. She loved him. She wanted Kaylee to have a father, so she made it work, week after week, month after month. But something did not feel right about that arrangement. Even from the outside looking in, something about it was off. They exchanged Kaylee almost like 2 people who were already divorced, even though they had never been married. Patrick came and went on his own terms. Kelsey held everything else together, and what Kelsey did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Patrick had a very specific reason for keeping that distance. There was another life he was maintaining, hundreds of miles away in Twin Falls, Idaho. And that life was about to collide with hers in a way nobody could walk back from. Her name was Crystal Kenny. She was a nurse. She lived in Twin Falls, Idaho. She had 2 children from previous relationships, and she and Patrick Frazee had a history that went all the way back to 2006. In 2018, they reconnected. Patrick started making regular trips north, telling people it was ranch business, livestock, supply runs. The kind of vague explanation that sounds reasonable the first few times you hear it. It was not ranch business. He was visiting Crystal. And here is where it gets complicated. Crystal knew about Kelsey. She knew there was a fiancé. She knew there was a baby. Patrick told her the same thing he probably told himself whenever he needed to. The relationship with Kelsey was almost over. He would be free soon. Just give it time. Crystal stayed. And I'm not going to pretend I fully understand that decision. But I think it matters that she stayed because of what Patrick asked her to do next. Starting in the fall of 2018, the requests began. And the word requests does not really do it justice. Patrick wanted Crystal to help him get rid of Kelsey. Not leave her. Not break up with her. Get rid of her. September 2018. Crystal got in her car in Twin Falls, Idaho, and drove to Pueblo, Colorado. She went to DOS Aviation, the airport where Kelsey worked every day. She got close, and then something stopped her. She turned around and drove all the way back to Idaho. She told Patrick it had not worked out. October 2018. He asked again, same request. Crystal made the drive again. Pueblo, the airport, and again she could not go through with it. She drove home and told Patrick she was not that kind of person, that she could not do this. Here is what I keep coming back to, though. She drove to that airport twice, across state lines, close enough to see where Kelsey worked. And both times, she turned around and went home, but she never once called the police. Not after the first time, not after the second. She never told anyone what Patrick had asked her to do, and I do not think that detail is small. I think that is actually one of the most consequential details in this entire case. Because Kelsey Berreth was still alive. She was still dropping Kaylee off a daycare and flying planes and buying coffee and building a life. There was still time. And the one person who knew what was coming chose to go home instead of make a phone call. Patrick did not stop. He had a third plan, one he decided to carry out himself. November 22nd, 2018, Thanksgiving Day. The security cameras at the Safeway in Woodland Park capture Kelsey at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She has Katie with her in the cart. She is picking out ingredients for dinner. She is smiling at her daughter. She looks like someone with the rest of the day ahead of her. She buys what she needs, and she goes home. Patrick Frazee's version of what happened next is this. He came to Kelsey's house later that afternoon to pick up Kaylee for a scheduled visit. Kelsey handed her over. She was calm. She mentioned she might visit family. Everything was completely normal. That was the last time he saw her. Investigators looked at that version of events and concluded it was a lie. What actually happened inside that house that afternoon was reconstructed over months through forensic evidence and testimony. Kelsey Berreth was killed inside her own home on Thanksgiving Day 2018. Kaylee, 1 year old, was in another room when it happened. And when it was over, Patrick Frazee did not call for help. He did not call 911. He did not call Kelsey's family. He did not call anyone who might have been able to do something. He called Crystal. The day after Thanksgiving, Crystal Kenny got in her car again. This time the drive was different. This time she knew exactly what she was driving toward. She drove more than 500 miles, more than 8 hours. And she did not go empty-handed. She brought cleaning supplies, gloves, chemicals. Think about that for a moment, because I think it is easy to let that detail slide past you. She did not grab whatever was under her sink on the way out, the door. Someone made a decision before getting on that road. Someone thought about what would be needed. Someone packed a bag with a specific purpose in mind. That is not panic. That is preparation. Crystal arrived at Kelsey's house and found what Patrick had left behind. According to her own testimony, she spent 4 hours inside that home trying to clean it, trying to erase what had happened. And when she later testified about this moment, she said something that I've thought about many times since. She said that Kelsey's mother and that little girl never needed to see what was in that house. That she could not let them walk into that. And I understand why that sounds almost sympathetic. It almost is. But here is the problem. Crystal had driven to that airport twice. She had 2 chances to stop this before it ever happened. She chose to go home both times. And now she was on her knees in a dead woman's house, trying to make sure no one could prove what had been done to her. When the cleanup was done, Patrick handed Crystal something else, Kelsey's phone. The instructions were simple. Take it back to Idaho, turn it on there, send messages. Be Kelsey. Make it look like she walked away on her own terms. 3 days after Thanksgiving, on November 25th, the phone came back to life. In Idaho. A message went out to Kelsey's employer at DOS Aviation. Family emergency. Needs time off. Unexpectedly. No details given. Then another message, this one to Cheryl, Kelsey's mother. Brief. Vague. Said she was fine. Said she just needed some space. The messages were short. They did not sound like Kelsey. The tone was wrong. The timing was wrong. But they did the one thing they needed to do. They bought time. Cell tower records tracked that phone to Gooding, Idaho, nearly 700 miles from Kelsey's home in Colorado. On paper, the story had a shape now. Kelsey had left. Kelsey was in Idaho. Kelsey just needed some distance from everything. It was not a perfect cover, but it was functional enough. But something did not feel right to Kelsey Berreth. She read those messages, and she felt it immediately. Not dramatically, not in a way she could point to a single word and say, "There, that is the proof." Just quietly, persistently, undeniably wrong. The tone was not her daughter. The phrasing was not her daughter. Kelsey would never ask for space on a holiday. She would never go days without contact with Kaylee. She would never leave work without a real, complete explanation. Cheryl knew her daughter the way only a mother can, and she knew that whatever those messages were, they did not come from Kelsey. So she got on a plane, flew from Washington to Colorado, went directly to Kelsey's house in Woodland Park. What she found there did not give her any comfort. The car was in the garage. The purse was inside. The wallet, the identification, everything that a person takes with them when they go somewhere, was exactly where it had always been. Every single thing in place, except Kelsey. December 2nd, 2018, 10 days after Thanksgiving. 10 days after those Safeway cameras captured a young mother smiling at her daughter in a grocery cart. Kelsey Berreth filed an official missing persons report with the Woodland Park Police Department. The moment investigators started pulling records, Patrick Frazee's story began to come apart. They spoke with Patrick. He was calm, measured. He told them exactly what he had been telling everyone. She handed him Kaylee. She said she needed space. He had not heard from her since. Nothing in his delivery cracked. Nothing gave it away on the surface. But the phone records said something different. The data showed that Kelsey's phone had traveled to Idaho, specifically to an area in the vicinity of a home belonging to a woman named Crystal Kenny. Investigators started pulling threads. They learned about Crystal's connection to Patrick. They learned about the regular trips he had been making to Idaho throughout 2018. They obtained search warrants. What they found inside Kelsey's house was not nothing. Forensic evidence. Physical traces that indicated something violent and deliberate had taken place in that home. Combined with Patrick's purchase records from the days surrounding Thanksgiving, the picture stopped being ambiguous. Every indicator pointed in one direction. December 21st, 2018. Exactly 1 month after Kelsey was last seen alive, Patrick Frazee was arrested. The charges were serious. Murder in the first degree, solicitation of murder on 3 separate counts, and tampering with evidence. But prosecutors had a problem that was not going to disappear on its own. They had no body. They had forensic evidence and records and a timeline that pointed directly at Patrick. But they did not have Kelsey. And Patrick was not going to tell them where she was. He made that clear from the moment he was taken into custody. The entire case was going to come down to one person, and that person was Crystal Kenny. What do you think was really happening inside Patrick's mind during those 10 days between Thanksgiving and the missing persons report? He had Kaylee. He was going about his life. He was answering questions from investigators without flinching. Whatever he felt about what he had done, he kept it completely invisible to everyone around him. And I think that controlled stillness is one of the most important things to understand about Patrick Frazee. Because it does not go away at the arrest. It does not go away at the trial. It never goes away. January 2019, 2 months after Kelsey disappeared, prosecutors made their move. They approached Crystal Kenny with an offer. Testify against Patrick. Tell everything, hold nothing back, and in exchange, she would face charges only for tampering with evidence. Nothing connected to the murder itself. No charges for the drive, no charges for the cleanup, no charges for the fake messages sent from Kelsey's phone. Crystal had to make a decision, and I think it is worth slowing down here. Because this is the part of the case where the human picture gets genuinely complicated, and I do not think it serves anyone to flatten it. Crystal was afraid, that is clear. She was afraid of Patrick, a man who had planned a murder across multiple months and then carried it out without visible emotion. She was afraid of what the legal system might do to her. She was afraid of losing custody of her own 2 children, the people she had been protecting in her own mind this entire time. Those are not small fears. Those are the kinds of fears that can paralyze a person completely. But she had also been carrying this for 2 months. 2 months of knowing exactly what she found when she walked into that house. 2 months of knowing what those text messages really were and who was actually sending them. 2 months of nightmares. 2 months of a secret with no clean ending. She accepted the deal. And she told them everything. February 2019, Crystal Kenny entered a guilty plea for tampering with evidence. As part of that agreement, she provided investigators with a complete account. The requests Patrick made in September, the requests in October, the call she received on Thanksgiving night, the 8-hour drive, the 4 hours of cleaning, the phone handoff, the instructions about the messages, and the specific details Patrick had confessed to her directly about what he did to Kelsey inside that house. That testimony became the foundation of the entire prosecution. October 2019. Nearly 1 year after Kelsey was last seen at that Safeway, Patrick Frazee went to trial at the Teller County Courthouse in Cripple Creek, Colorado. The challenge the prosecution faced was unusual and significant. They were pursuing a first-degree murder conviction without a body. That is a difficult thing to accomplish. Juries want something physical. A body that has never been found creates space for reasonable doubt, and experienced defense attorneys know exactly how to expand that space. Prosecutor Dan May knew what he was working with. He built the case around forensic evidence recovered from inside Kelsey's home, phone records, cell tower data, Patrick's purchase history in the days surrounding Thanksgiving, surveillance footage, and the testimony of Crystal Lee, the name Crystal had taken to protect her privacy. Crystal spent days on the witness stand. She walked through everything, the prior requests, step by step. The call on Thanksgiving night, the drive from Idaho with the cleaning supplies, what she found when she arrived, what she spent 4 hours trying to erase, what Patrick told her he had done to Kelsey. She did not minimize her own role. She did not reframe herself as someone with no choice. She sat in that chair and said what happened. The defense did what defenses do in situations like this. They argued that Crystal was not a witness. She was a participant. That she had powerful reasons to shift the blame entirely onto Patrick in exchange for a favorable deal. That the jury was being asked to convict a man on the word of a woman who helped cover up the crime and then negotiated her way to probation. And here's the thing, that is not an unreasonable argument. It is, actually. The kind of argument that works in a lot of cases. But here is the problem for Patrick's defense. The forensic evidence kept saying the same thing Crystal was saying. Every point in her testimony that could be checked against something physical held up. The traces inside Kelsey's home matched her account. The phone records matched her account. The cell tower data matched her account. Patrick's movements matched her account. At every single junction where the story could be tested, it did not break. Kelsey's brother Clinton testified about his sister. Her co-workers at DOS Aviation spoke about her dedication, her professionalism, the way she loved Kaylee. And Cheryl Berreth took the stand and described the days she spent searching for her daughter, flying to Colorado, walking into that house, finding everything in place except the person who was supposed to be there. Patrick Frazee sat through all of it without moving. He never testified. He exercised his right to silence throughout the entire trial. He did not look at Crystal while she spoke about what she found in that house. He did not react when Clinton spoke about his sister. He did not react when Cheryl described those days of not knowing, and when photographs of Kaylee were shown to the jury, and Kelsey's family wept openly in that courtroom. Patrick Frazee did not move. That stillness. I keep returning to it. Silence at trial is a legal right, and no one should read guilt into that alone. But there is a specific quality to his stillness that goes beyond a legal strategy. The complete absence of grief. The complete absence of fear. Not even discomfort. Just nothing. This is where things start to feel off in a different way. Not the evidence. Not the timeline. The person. A man who tried to have Kelsey killed twice before doing it himself. A man who, the moment it was done, called not for emergency services, but for a cleanup crew. A man who constructed an alibi out of a dead woman's phone and deployed it from 700 miles away. Everything about this case speaks to someone who was thinking clearly under pressure. Someone who was making cold, sequential calculations. And that raises a question I do not think has a clean answer. When someone is that deliberate, that controlled, what does it mean that he still has not said where Kelsey is? Because that is not an accident. That is not something he forgot. That is a choice he makes actively every single day. November 18th, 2019. The jury came back. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Guilty on 3 counts of solicitation of murder. Guilty of tampering with evidence. Every charge. Every count. Patrick showed no reaction as the verdict was read. He sat in the same controlled stillness he had maintained from the first day of testimony to the last. 4 days later, on November 22nd, 2019, exactly 1 year to the day that Kelsey was last seen alive, Judge Scott Sells pronounced the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 156 additional years for the remaining charges. Patrick Frazee will die in Sterling Correctional Facility in Colorado. He is 40 years old. Cheryl Berreth stood in that courtroom and read her victim impact statement. She spoke about the fear, the specific, prolonged cruelty of losing someone and not knowing what happened to them. The inability to grieve properly because there is nowhere to go. Kelsey's family sat together and held each other. When a photograph of Kaylee was projected on screen for the jury, they wept. Patrick did not move. Patrick has surrendered all parental rights. Kaylee lives with her maternal grandparents, Cheryl and Daryl Berreth, in a home that is full of love and full of Kelsey. Now, Crystal Kenny, February 2020. Crystal was sentenced for her role in the cover-up. 3 years of probation, no prison time. Kelsey's family made clear in public statements that they were deeply disappointed. They felt the sentence did not reflect the weight of what Crystal had known and when she had known it. That feeling is hard to argue with when you sit with the full timeline. Prosecutors defended the deal. They said what they believed to be true. Without Crystal's testimony, Patrick Frazee might never have been convicted at all. The entire case rested on what she was willing to say out loud. The deal was the price of that. Later in 2020, an appeals court reviewed the sentence and ordered a new sentencing hearing with a maximum of 18 months. Crystal lives in Idaho today. She avoids cameras. She does not speak publicly. She carries whatever she carries. And as of today, 6 years after Thanksgiving 2018, the body of Kelsey Berreth has never been found. Investigators searched the Midway and Fountain landfills in Fountain, Colorado in February 2019. They found nothing. The family has offered rewards. They have contracted private search teams. Cheryl Berreth has said publicly, more than once, that she simply wants to bring her daughter home. That Kelsey deserves a proper burial. That she deserves peace. That the family deserves a place to go. Patrick Frazee knows where she is. That is not speculation. That is just the reality of what happened. He was there. He made every decision that followed, and every day since his conviction, he has chosen not to say. I do not know what to call that. I am not sure. The English language has a clean word for it, but it feels like the last form of control he has. The one thing no court, no sentence, no amount of time can take away from him. The location of a woman he killed is the only thing that still belongs entirely to him. And he is keeping it deliberately, methodically, the same way he kept everything else. Kelsey Berreth is now more than 7 years old. She lives with her grandparents, Cheryl and Daryl, in a home full of love and full of Kelsey. They show her photographs. They play videos. They tell her about the woman her mother was. The flight instructor who loved early mornings and long runs and caramel macchiatos. The woman who kept Bible verses on her desk next to photos of her daughter. The woman who smiled in a way that filled every room she walked into. They tell Kaylee that her mother was a pilot, that she was brave and precise and dedicated, that she chose one of the hardest careers she could find, and worked until she was exactly where she wanted to be. They tell her that Kelsey loved her more than anything she had ever loved before in her life. And they make sure Kaylee knows that. Every day, in every way they can, they make sure she knows. Kaylee will grow up with a story instead of a person, with photographs instead of memories she actually made, with a family that loves her completely, and a mother she will only ever know through the words of people who knew her first. That is what Patrick Frazee took. Not just Kelsey. All of that. Every ordinary Tuesday and every school pickup and every bedtime and every moment a mother and daughter were supposed to have together. He took all of it. And then he held on to the one thing that would let the family start to heal. And he kept that, too. Kelsey Berreth went to Safeway on Thanksgiving morning to buy dinner. She smiled at her daughter. She had plans for the afternoon, the weekend, the year ahead, the rest of her life. And then she went home. Patrick Frazee is in prison. Crystal Kenny is in Idaho. Kaylee is with her grandparents. And somewhere, in a location only one person on Earth knows, Kelsey is still waiting to come home. The verdict was read. The sentence was handed down. The court did everything the law allowed it to do. But a conviction without a location is not the end of a story. It is just the end of what the legal system had the power to accomplish. The rest of it, the part that would give this family what they actually need, that is still Patrick's choice to make. And so far, every single day, he has made the same one. Here's what I keep thinking about, and I want to be honest that I am not certain of this. I'm just sitting with it. Patrick Frazee is not someone who acted in a sudden moment of rage and then lost control of everything that followed. The planning was too careful for that. 2 requests to Crystal across 2 separate months. A cleanup organized within hours. A phone deployed 700 miles away to create a false trail. A calm, consistent story maintained under police questioning. None of that is someone who lost control. All of that is someone who was managing a problem with the same deliberate focus they would apply to anything else. And I think that framing, seeing Kelsey not as someone he loved and then hurt, but as an obstacle he decided to remove and then manage, changes the shape of everything in this case. The requests to Crystal were not desperation. They were outsourcing. When that did not work, he handled it himself and then managed the aftermath exactly the way he managed the planning. Quietly, methodically, without visible emotion from start to finish. That kind of thinking does not disappear inside a prison cell. Which is maybe why, even now, even with nothing left to protect and no strategy left to execute, he still will not say where she is, because saying it would mean releasing the last thing he controls. And I think, for someone like Patrick Frazee, control was never really about freedom. It was always the point. I am not certain of that, but it does not feel like nothing. Kelsey Berreth was 29 years old. She was a pilot. She was a mother. She was a daughter and a sister and a friend. She had a desk with Bible verses and a daughter whose photo she looked at every single day. She needed good sleep and long runs and time with God and coffee that was slightly too sweet. She had a whole life built carefully around the things that mattered to her. She deserved to keep it. Notebook. Lee thanks you for staying with this story all the way through. Cases like this one are not easy to sit with, and I think that is exactly why they deserve to be told, carefully and completely. If Kelsey's story moved you, share this video. Her family is still searching, and every person who knows this case is one more reason for that search to continue. Drop a candle in the comments if you made it to the end. And before you go, I want to leave you with one question that I genuinely cannot answer. If Crystal had walked into a police station in September after that first drive to Pueblo, do you think any of this plays out the same way? The trial happened. The verdict came. Patrick is in prison for life. But Kaylee still does not have a grave to visit. I do not know what to do with that, but I think it is worth sitting with.